From the crunch of cornflakes over funeral potatoes to the moment someone flipped a cast-iron skillet and a perfect ring of caramelized pineapple appeared, these were the dishes that bent church basement tables. Most were never written down. Here are 30 church potluck dishes that disappeared after the 1980s. Funeral potatoes showed up before the grieving family even made it home from the cemetery. Some woman from the Relief Society, and it was always a woman, would already have a pan warming in the church kitchen. Shredded hash browns folded into sour cream, cream of chicken soup, and sharp cheddar, then crowned with buttered cornflakes that turned golden and crackly in the oven. The dish came out of 1950s Mormon communities in Utah, where the Women's Relief Society organized bereavement meals with military precision. By the 60s, it had spread into Lutheran basements across the Midwest. At the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, funeral potatoes appeared on a commemorative souvenir pin, proof of how deeply the casserole had rooted itself. The cornflake crust was the signature, visible from across the fellowship hall. The women who assembled those pans without a recipe, who folded in sour cream by feel alone, are mostly gone. The pan still comes out. It never tastes quite right. You could see straight through to the bottom of the bowl, and that was the whole point. The 7-layer salad was built in clear glass, so every stripe showed. Iceberg lettuce torn into ribbons, then frozen peas still half cold, then diced red onion, shredded cheddar, crumbled bacon, sliced hard-boiled eggs, and a thick white cap of mayonnaise spread edge to edge like frosting. The old cooks knew you made it the night before and left it uncovered, so the mayo sealed everything and kept the lettuce crisp. You never tossed it. You served it with a long spoon that reached the bottom, dragging all 7 layers up in one vertical scoop. That glass trifle bowl was not an accident. The women who brought these to potlucks in the 1970s understood that eating starts with the eyes. By the 80s, pasta salads with vinaigrette pushed these layered beauties off the table. Nobody builds a salad meant to be admired anymore. 2 ingredients had no business working together, and that was exactly why they did. A jar of grape jelly and a bottle of Heinz chili sauce went into a crock pot with frozen meatballs. And by the time the Wednesday night crowd reached the fellowship hall, the sauce had turned glossy, sweet, tangy, and completely inexplicable. The recipes circulated through church cookbooks by the late 1960s, usually handwritten on an index card with no attribution. The women who made them understood something no culinary school taught: that grape jelly melted into chili sauce creates a glaze with the depth of something that simmered for hours. You plugged the crock pot in before the service, and it was ready when the sermon ended. Kids hovered with toothpicks. Men went back for thirds and pretended they hadn't. When someone finally asked whose they were and what the secret was, the answer, grape jelly, was met with disbelief. That was the alchemy, turning the cheapest thing in the pantry into the first dish to vanish. If your grandmother unmolded a tomato aspic without it collapsing, she earned the quiet respect of every woman in the room. Tomato juice simmered with Worcestershire, celery salt, and a bay leaf, then set with Knox gelatin in a ring mold and chilled overnight. The next morning, she ran a knife around the edge, placed a lettuce-lined platter on top, and flipped. When it released clean, ruby red and trembling on the plate, it was a small domestic triumph. Aspic ruled Southern church luncheons from the 1940s through the 60s. Jell-O even released a seasoned tomato flavor to meet demand. Some women filled the center with chicken salad, turning the ring into a complete presentation. By the 70s, fresh salads pushed aspic off the table and it began to seem quaint. The ring molds sit in estate sale boxes now. The women who could unmold them, blindfolded, left behind the pans, but not the nerve. If tomato aspic required steady hands, shipwreck casserole required nothing but whatever was already in the kitchen. This Amish and Midwestern layered dish earned its name honestly. Everything went in and you hoped for the best. A greased pan received layers in strict order: sliced raw potatoes, then onions, then uncooked rice, then browned ground beef, then kidney beans from the can, then sliced carrots, and finally canned tomato soup thinned with water. The lid went on, the oven went to 350, and you left it alone for 90 minutes. The rice absorbed liquid from the tomatoes and beef drippings, the potatoes softened from steam, and 7 separate ingredients fused into a single meal. Deep South churches, Amish communities in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and Lutheran congregations across the plains all claimed their own version. It fed 10 people for under $2 in the 1960s. Nobody layers a casserole blind anymore, and nobody feeds that many for that little. Friday meant fish, and for families who couldn't afford fresh filets, Friday meant the tall pink can of salmon on the second shelf. Salmon loaf took that can, bones, skin, liquid, and all, and turned it into something that held its shape on a plate. The bones were so soft from canning you mashed them right in, and the old cooks insisted on it because that was where the calcium lived. Eggs, cracker crumbs, a little milk, minced onion, and a squeeze of lemon went into the bowl. Then the mixture got packed into a loaf pan and baked until the top cracked golden. It came to the table sliced thick with white sauce, ladled over each piece. Through the 40s and 50s, this stretched a single can across a family of 6. Church suppers during Lent lined the buffet with salmon loaf alongside scalloped potatoes and coleslaw. Your mother's version was never as good as your grandmother's. She knew it. She made it anyway, because that loaf pan was still warm from a woman who never measured anything. Nobody outside the Midwest knew what scalloped corn was, and the women who made it never bothered to explain. 2 cans of creamed corn, 1 can of whole kernel drained, 2 beaten eggs, a sleeve of crushed saltines, a pour of milk, a chunk of butter cut into pieces, and black pepper, stirred together and poured into a buttered dish. The name confused outsiders who expected shellfish, but scalloped meant baking in layers with cream and crumbs, a method reaching back to the 1800s. Some historians believe the earliest versions were baked in actual scallop shells, though nobody in Iowa ever used one. The mixture puffed up like a savory custard, golden on top with a creamy center that held just enough cracker texture to keep each spoonful interesting. The real knowledge was the ratio. Too many crackers and it dried out. Too few and it wouldn't set. You had to stand beside her to learn it. Most people never did. Ham loaf started arguments, not about whether it was good, everyone agreed on that, but about whose glaze was better. Ground ham and ground pork mixed with eggs, cracker crumbs, and milk packed into a loaf pan. Simple enough. But the glaze was where the kitchen politics began. Some women swore by brown sugar and dry mustard. Others insisted on vinegar, brown sugar, and water, basted every 15 minutes until the top went sticky and dark. A few added crushed pineapple and were either praised or quietly judged depending on the congregation. Ham loaf was Pennsylvania Dutch and Midwest territory that peaked in the 50s and 60s, when ground ham from the butcher cost next to nothing. It showed up at funerals, holiday potlucks, and Wednesday night suppers, sliced thick, always beside scalloped potatoes. The women who made it took the glaze recipe to their graves on purpose. You asked, they smiled, they changed the subject. That was the answer. She started rolling them the morning of the supper, and if you kept your hands clean, she let you help. Swedish meatballs in the upper Midwest were not the frozen bags. They were ground beef and pork mixed with breadcrumbs soaked in cream, grated onion, a pinch of allspice, and sometimes nutmeg that nobody admitted was there. Each one rolled by hand, no bigger than a walnut, browned in butter in a cast-iron skillet in batches that took the better part of an hour. The gravy came from the drippings, flour stirred into browned butter, then broth added slowly while she scraped the pan with a wooden spoon. Scandinavian immigrants brought this to Minnesota and Wisconsin in the late 1800s. By the 50s, Swedish meatball suppers were a Lutheran church staple across the plains. The lingonberry jam on the side was non-negotiable, tart against the richness of that cream gravy. The women who rolled 200 meatballs before sunrise are gone now. The frozen ones taste like nothing they would recognize. It sat at the center of the appetizer table like a small, edible monument, studded with chopped pecans and surrounded by Ritz crackers arranged in overlapping rows. 2 blocks of cream cheese softened on the counter, a bag of shredded sharp cheddar, a splash of Worcestershire, garlic powder, and, in the bolder congregations, a tablespoon of grated onion. Everything mashed with a fork, rolled into a ball with bare hands, pressed into the nuts. It chilled overnight, and by the time it reached the fellowship hall, the outside had firmed while the inside stayed soft. Every church had one woman who always brought it. Nobody else tried, because hers was the standard. She wrapped it in plastic over a paper plate, carried it in the same container every time, set it down without a word. In the 60s and 70s, a cheese ball opened every church social, every holiday reception. Now the crackers come with hummus, and the Tupperware is at the thrift store. If the cheese ball opened the evening, chicken divan was why people stayed in line. This was the casserole that made frozen broccoli taste expensive, a layer of steamed florets, a layer of cooked chicken, and a sauce that had no right being that good. Cream of chicken soup mixed with mayonnaise, a squeeze of lemon, and sharp cheddar, baked until it bubbled at the edges under a cap of buttered breadcrumbs. The name came from the Divan Parisien restaurant in New York, where the original was refined. But the church potluck version, built on canned soup and frozen vegetables, became the one that fed the country. In the 1960s, chicken divan was glamorous, the dish you made when you wanted the church women to notice your cooking. Assemble it that morning, slide it into the oven an hour before serving, and watch the breadcrumbs. When they went from pale to deep gold, you pulled it. That pan came home empty every single time. The woman who perfected the mayo to soup ratio is the one whose empty chair nobody talks about. In the 70s, you could not open a junior league cookbook in Texas without finding King Ranch chicken in the first 20 pages. The dish had no verified connection to the famous ranch. Nobody knew where it started, only that it spread through church cookbooks and covered dish suppers like a brush fire. Corn tortillas torn into strips and layered with shredded chicken, then blanketed in cream of mushroom soup, cream of chicken soup, a can of Rotel tomatoes with chiles, and enough cheddar to hold everything together. The tortillas softened in the oven, absorbing that spiced tomato cream until the layers fused into something halfway between enchiladas and a casserole. The old cooks knew to let it rest 10 minutes so the layers set and sliced clean. Pull it early and it ran like lava, which the kids preferred. Every family had a version with a different soup-to-rotel ratio, and you learned yours by watching. It peaked in the 70s, slipped away by the 90s, and left behind 1,000 stained index cards nobody can throw out. Nobody could explain the name, and that was half the fun. Watergate salad appeared in church halls across the Midwest in the mid-1970s, right when Kraft released instant pistachio pudding mix. A box of that pudding stirred into Cool Whip with crushed pineapple, marshmallows, and chopped pecans. 5 ingredients, no cooking, and the result was a pale green fluff that looked like nothing else on the table. A Chicago newspaper reportedly rechristened the Kraft recipe, Pistachio Delight, with the Watergate name, though no one could say what pudding had to do with Nixon. The women who brought it didn't care about the politics. They cared that it traveled well, stayed cold for hours, and drew a crowd. That pistachio color was impossible to miss on a table of browns and beiges. It was called a salad, served as dessert, and nobody questioned the contradiction. If you grew up in Arkansas, you knew talarine. If you grew up anywhere else, you'd never heard the word. This was a regional ground beef and noodle casserole that showed up at every potluck in the state from the 50s through the late 80s. So local, it barely appeared in cookbooks outside the Ozarks. Ground beef browned with onion, stirred into egg noodles with canned tomatoes, corn, and a heavy pour of shredded cheddar, then baked until the cheese melted into the pasta and the edges crisped. Some versions added cream of mushroom soup. Others stayed clean, just beef, noodles, tomatoes, cheese. The name likely came from a mangled pronunciation of tagliarini, the Italian pasta, filtered through generations of Ozark kitchens until the Italian vanished and only the Arkansas version remained. It was Hamburger Helper before Hamburger Helper existed. The women who made it are in their 80s now, if they're still here at all, and the church cookbooks that carried their recipes sit in boxes nobody has opened since the funeral. Long before the casseroles arrived, the bake sale table was already set. and creme de menthe bars owned the corner next to the coffee urn. 3 layers built one at a time, a chocolate base from crushed grahams, cocoa, butter, and egg, pressed flat and baked just long enough to set. A middle layer of buttercream tinted green with creme de menthe, or, in the Baptist churches, mint extract and food coloring. A top coat of melted chocolate chips smoothed with butter. The whole thing chilled until firm, then got cut into bars no bigger than 2 fingers. The woman who cut them cleanest set hers on a doily. These circulated through 70s church cookbooks under a dozen names: grasshopper bars, mint brownies, after-dinner mints, but the flavor was always the same: cool, rich, and gone before the second hymn. The recipe cards are still out there, spotted with chocolate. The hands that cut them that clean are not. In the South, they never called it Jell-O salad. They called it congealed salad, and the distinction mattered. This was a category: fruit suspended in flavored gelatin, often with cream cheese folded in, sometimes cottage cheese, sometimes pecans, occasionally grated carrots for a version the hostess could present as vegetables. The technique required patience. You let the gelatin reach just thickened before folding in the fruit, or everything sank and the mold came out lopsided. The old cooks tilted the bowl. When the surface wrinkled instead of flowed, it was time. Lime with pear halves and cream cheese was a classic. Strawberry with pineapple and bananas was the holiday standard. Orange with mandarin segments showed up at Easter. Each congregation had its rotation, and deviating was noticed. The women who made these are slipping away, and their granddaughters don't own a ring mold. The moment she flipped the skillet, the whole kitchen held its breath. Pineapple upside-down cake was built in cast iron. Butter and brown sugar melted together, then canned pineapple rings laid in a circle with a maraschino cherry pressed into each center. Yellow cake batter poured over the top. The reveal was the performance. Plate pressed over the skillet, a quick flip, a pause, then the lift. And if the caramel set right, every ring stayed in place, glossy and dark and perfect. In 1925, Dole held a recipe contest and received 2,500 entries for this single cake. It was the church potluck showstopper for the next half-century, the dessert that drew applause. By the 80s, layer cakes with frosting replaced it. The cast iron skillets went to garage sales. Nobody flips a cake anymore. It showed up looking like nothing else, electric green in a dark chocolate crust, and the name made kids giggle every time. Grasshopper pie was a no-bake icebox dessert, chocolate cookie crust, a filling of creme de menthe and creme de cacao folded into whipped cream, and enough green coloring to glow under fluorescent lights. Some recipes used melted marshmallows to help it set. Others relied on gelatin. The Baptist version swapped liqueurs for extract, and nobody discussed why. It sliced clean, stayed cold for an hour without weeping, and tasted like sophisticated mint chocolate that wandered into the wrong party. The pie appeared in 70s church cookbooks between chess pie and lemon icebox cake. The women who made it understood presentation. That shock of green against the dark crust was deliberate. It led the dessert table on purpose. She made it every Wednesday for years, and then one Wednesday she didn't, and nobody else knew the ratio. Broccoli rice casserole was the quiet workhorse of the church supper, a block of Velveeta cubed into a saucepan with cream of mushroom soup and butter, melted smooth, then stirred into rice and chopped broccoli and baked. 30 minutes at 350, and it came out bubbling with a golden skin where the cheese caught the heat. The Velveeta was the key. It melted into a sauce that stayed creamy instead of breaking, which real cheese couldn't manage. By the 70s, this casserole was so standard, some church kitchens kept the ingredients stocked. It fed 30 people for under $5. It reheated without drying out. It traveled across town in foil without spilling. It did everything right. And when the woman who always brought it stopped coming, the gap on the table was the first thing everyone noticed. While casseroles needed ovens and cold salads needed refrigerators, three-bean salad needed nothing but a bowl and time. And that was its weapon at every outdoor church picnic from the 50s forward. Canned green beans, wax beans, and kidney beans, drained and rinsed, tossed in a vinaigrette of oil, vinegar, sugar, and diced onion. No mayonnaise meant it sat in the sun for hours without turning, which made it the only reliable salad at a July potluck where the nearest refrigerator was 100 yards away in the basement. The flavor improved with time. The beans absorbed the sweet tart dressing overnight and lost their tinny edge. Some added celery or green pepper. Others kept it pure. 3 beans, dressing, nothing else. It disappeared when potlucks moved indoors and refrigeration made mayo-dressed salads safe year-round. Nobody missed it then. Everyone misses it now. Some called it church lady cake, and that told you everything about where it lived. Texas sheet cake was baked in a jelly roll pan, thin as a brownie, iced while still warm with chocolate frosting loaded with chopped pecans that soaked into the surface and turned the top into something between cake and fudge. The batter came together in a saucepan. Cocoa, butter, and oil heated together, poured into flour and buttermilk and eggs, mixed and in the pan in under 10 minutes. The term sheath cake appeared in print around 1950, and by 60 the recipe was circulating in its final form. It fed 40 from a single pan. The warm frosting had to be poured and spread fast because it set quickly. Too slow and the pecans clumped. Too fast and the surface cracked. The women who timed it right didn't use a clock. They watched the sheen. When it lost its gloss, they moved. That instinct doesn't survive a recipe card. Waldorf salad brought a whisper of hotel dining to the church basement. Created at the Waldorf Astoria in New York in the 1890s, the original was just apples, celery, and mayonnaise. But by the time it reached Midwestern church cookbooks in the 40s, it had collected grapes, walnuts, and sometimes miniature marshmallows the purists tolerated but never endorsed. The apples had to be crisp, Red Delicious or Granny Smith diced small, and the celery had to snap. The walnuts were toasted by the women who cared and raw by those who didn't, and you could taste the difference. It arrived in a cut glass bowl that saw daylight only at church functions and Christmas, set beside heavier dishes that made it look light and almost healthy. By the 80s, yogurt dressings and exotic fruit replaced the mayonnaise and walnuts. The Waldorf slipped off the table. The glass bowls are still in the cabinet. They come out less and less. You made it the night before. That was the rule. Overnight layered salad was built in a glass trifle bowl. Shredded iceberg on the bottom, then frozen peas still hard from the bag, diced celery, sliced water chestnuts, chopped hard-boiled eggs, crumbled bacon, and over the top a full cup of mayonnaise spread edge to edge like a seal. The mayonnaise kept the air out, kept the lettuce from browning, and melted overnight into a dressing that seeped through every layer by morning. A sprinkle of sugar and shredded cheddar went on last, and you did not touch it until service. The order mattered, peas on lettuce, never the reverse, and the women who got it wrong heard about it quietly. It traveled to every church supper and funeral luncheon from the 60s through the 80s, always in that glass bowl. When the last woman who remembered the layer order stopped making it, nobody tried to guess. Hot chicken salad confused people who'd never seen it. A warm casserole that started as a cold salad and crossed over in the 50s when a Southern cook decided it would bake. Diced chicken mixed with mayonnaise, cream of chicken soup, celery, almonds, and a squeeze of lemon, topped with crushed potato chips or cornflake crumbs. 25 minutes at 350, and the topping turned golden while the filling stayed creamy. The lemon was the secret, just enough to cut the richness without tasting citrusy. Junior League cookbooks across Mississippi and Georgia printed versions through the 60s and 70s, each swearing it was the original. It used leftover roast chicken, Sunday's bird getting a second life under cornflakes. The women who made it stretched one chicken across 2 meals and made both feel generous. That math faded when rotisserie birds got cheap and leftovers lost their purpose. If all those casseroles and salads tested patience, chess squares tested nerve, because there was no hiding a mistake under cornflakes or mayonnaise. A shortbread crust pressed into a 9x13 pan, then a filling of cream cheese, eggs, butter, powdered sugar, and yellow cake mix beaten together and poured over the top. It baked until the surface cracked like a cheesecake. and the center stayed soft. Pull it too early and it ran. Leave it too long and it dried into chalk. The name came from chess pie, that old southern custard dessert with roots tracing back to English lemon curd tarts. The squares were the potluck adaptation. Portable, sliceable, rich enough that a small piece satisfied. They showed up in church cookbooks across Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Carolinas starting in the 60s. When the woman who always brought them passed, her daughter found 6 copies of the recipe in different handwriting. Everyone had asked. No one got it quite the same. It took her 3 days, and she never complained once. Ribbon salad was built one gelatin layer at a time. Each flavor a different color, each set firm before the next was poured. And the finished product stood in the mold like stained glass. Red, then white, then green, then white, then orange. 5 layers minimum. Some women did 7. The white layers were sour cream or cream cheese beaten into lemon gelatin, poured at exactly the right temperature. Too hot and they melted the layer beneath. Too cold and they set before leveling. The old cooks tested with a knuckle. If it felt like bath water, it was ready. When she unmolded it at the church Christmas dinner, people gathered to watch because a clean unmold meant 3 days of work had held together, and a broken one meant starting over. She never broke one in 40 years. Her granddaughter tried it once, called it impossible, and bought a store cake instead. There were no apples in it, not a single one. Mock apple pie used Ritz crackers, whole sleeves of them broken into a pie crust and doused with a syrup of sugar, cream of tartar, water, and lemon juice that somehow, after baking, made the crackers taste like cooked apples. The cream of tartar was the trick. It created an acidity that mimicked the tartness of real fruit, and the sugar syrup softened the crackers into something that felt, on the tongue, like baked apple slices. Nabisco printed the recipe on the Ritz box starting in the 1930s, during the Depression, when apples cost money some families didn't have. The recipe stayed on the box for decades, and church cooks kept making it long after apples became affordable, partly from habit, partly because the pie was genuinely good, and partly because it carried a story about getting by. The cooks who first made it out of necessity never called it mock anything, they just called it pie. She wrapped it in wax paper and tied it with kitchen string, and it sat on the counter for 2 days before anyone was allowed to slice it. Date nut bread was dense, dark, sticky sweet, baked in a coffee can. The round shape was the signature, producing slices like wheels instead of rectangles. Chopped dates soaked in boiling water, mixed with brown sugar, butter, egg, flour, and a generous cup of walnuts. The batter filled a greased coffee can 2/3 full and baked low and slow. It was holiday bread, Thanksgiving through New Year's, and appeared at church Christmas bazaars sliced thin and spread with cream cheese. Dromedary Brand sold pre-chopped pitted dates that made the process easier, and that box was a staple of holiday baking aisles for decades. The coffee cans went to plastic. The dates moved to the specialty shelf. The bread went quiet the same year she did. In Scandinavian Lutheran churches across Minnesota and Wisconsin, the dessert table always had a bowl of something the old women called glorified rice, and the name was the whole story. Cold, cooked white rice folded into whipped cream with crushed pineapple, marshmallows, and maraschino cherries stirred through until the bowl turned pale pink. It was served cold in a glass dish, somewhere between pudding and salad. The rice had to be leftover, day-old, cold from the icebox, each grain separate. Fresh rice turned it to paste. That was the kind of detail you only learned by ruining a batch standing next to someone who'd made it 50 times. It showed up at every lutefisk dinner, every funeral lunch, every ladies' aid meeting from the 40s through the 70s. Nobody glorifies rice anymore. The word itself belongs to women who could make anything sound like a celebration. The dish that disappeared most completely wasn't a recipe. It was the covered dish supper itself. The long tables in the fellowship hall covered with mismatched tablecloths somebody ironed that morning. The handwritten labels taped to each dish so everyone knew who made what, because credit mattered, and so did knowing whose potato salad to avoid. The blessing that ran long. the kids weaving between legs with plates too full. The moment after the last amen when 40 hands reached for the chicken and the woman who made it stood back with her arms crossed because she already knew. Those suppers faded in the late 80s when the women who organized them got older and the younger ones didn't have time to cook for 60. The recipes survived in boxes. But the room, the noise, the heat, the too sweet tea in styrofoam cups, the way the building smelled like Sunday, that went quiet. And no recipe card brings a room back. Heaven-sent cornbread salad was often something people saw as the quintessential dish that would define the South. This was for a couple of reasons. Up in the South, corn had really made a lovely golden name for itself. People started seeing it as something that was heaven-sent, and I don't mean to make any puns. Corn was really the bestest friend for people who had nothing else to eat and nowhere else to go, and it kept a lot of food shortages from being worse than they needed to be. In homecomings and church gatherings, there were really vibrant and colorful salads that added a lot of flair and presentation to the vibe of the dinner. Let's talk about what you can typically expect in a cornbread salad, though. To start off, you get vegetables like chopped tomatoes, lots of green peppers, and red onions, which were actually a lot more popular in the South than any other kind of onion. Pinto beans and black beans were obviously going to make an appearance since this is a generational Southern dish we're talking about. Let's talk about the dressing, which was actually this really creamy and smooth mix of mayonnaise and sour cream. Put all that together, and you have yourself a pretty fulfilling salad. By the mid-20th century, desserts had begun embracing an unlikely star: whipped toppings. The faithful fluff salad was no exception. A mixture of pineapple chunks, instant pudding mix, mini marshmallows, and whipped topping. This dessert was as much a texture experiment as it was a sugary indulgence. Emerging during the 1950s and 60s, fluff salads rode the wave of post-war prosperity. Processed foods like instant pudding and canned fruit were symbols of modernity and time-saving innovation, making them ideal for busy families and church potlucks. Adding marshmallows, initially a campfire treats, brought a playful twist that appealed to children and adults alike. For many, it was a dish that straddled the line between fun and functional. But as the health-conscious trends of the 1980s took hold, this sugar-loaded dessert began to lose its charm. Critics pointed to its processed ingredients and lack of nutritional value, relegating it to fond memories of a more carefree era. Despite its decline, the faithful fluff salad remains a snapshot of its time, a reminder of when culinary creativity meant combining unlikely ingredients to bring a smile to the faces of churchgoers and potluck attendees alike. Fresh, vibrant, and undeniably wholesome, fellowship fruit kebabs were a beacon of color on church picnic tables. In an era when gelatin molds and mayonnaise-based salads reigned supreme, these skewers offered a refreshing alternative. Simple yet elegant, they featured a variety of seasonal fruits: pineapple, melon, grapes, and berries, artfully arranged on sticks and drizzled with a honey-lime glaze. The practicality of fruit kebabs was one of their biggest selling points. Easy to assemble, they required no utensils, making them a perfect grab-and-go option for outdoor gatherings. Plus, their versatility made them universally appealing. Whether you preferred tropical fruit, classic apple chunks, or a mix of whatever was on sale, the recipe adapted to suit any budget or taste. Add in the bright, tangy kick of honey and lime, and you had a snack that balanced natural sweetness with a touch of zest. So, what caused this recipe to slip into obscurity? Partly, the rise of pre-cut fruit platters took away the need for the extra effort. Additionally, the modern obsession with charcuterie boards and grazing tables overshadowed the humble kebab. Heavenly hash salad is a really good salad, unlike the rest of some of these. This fruit-filled salad is a staple of Sunday school gatherings, holiday dinners, and everything else you would ever associate with church gatherings. If you ever thought you needed a boost to your skin, your gut health, or you just needed more fruit in your life in general, this is the dish for you. Chunks of pineapple, the juiciest and freshest mandarin oranges you could find, the ripest maraschino cherries, the kind America's known for, and additional toppings of grapes, marshmallows, bananas, and apples. You could even have a whipped cream base using Cool Whip or sour cream and add in dry fruits for an extra crunch factor. It was pretty much the dream of anyone who liked their meals sweet and happy instead of sour and bitter. You could make this in advance. It looked amazing, and it tasted even better. Yet this still wasn't really the best part of this dish, believe it or not. The actual strength of the heavenly hash salad was the fact that you didn't need any kind of kitchen appliances to really make it. Don't have an oven? This is for you. It meant that a big majority of the population, which didn't have access to things like ovens, could actually enjoy a dessert too, for once. Now, the heavenly hash bit comes from just the way it looks, nothing else. There's no famous folklore or backstory to this one. It just looks like something you'd find behind those pearly white gates we all dream of. In the 1970s, dips reigned supreme at church potlucks and family gatherings, and few were as delightfully quirky as dill pickle dip. A creamy blend of sour cream, cream cheese, and finely chopped dill pickles, this tangy appetizer offered bold flavor with minimal effort. Whether served with crackers, chips, or vegetable sticks, it was an unexpected crowd pleaser that stood out among more traditional offerings. This dish emerged during an era when convenience and creativity defined home cooking. Dill pickles had been a staple in American pantries since the early 20th century, and combining them with creamy bases like sour cream or cream cheese was an innovative way to transform basic ingredients into something new. It was practical, too. Easy to whip up, affordable, and well-suited for large gatherings. So, what happened to this retro favorite? As culinary trends evolved, so did dips. Flashier, more complex recipes featuring exotic ingredients like artichokes and sun-dried tomatoes became the new standard, leaving humble dill pickle dip behind. And for those with pickier palates, the sharp, briny flavor wasn't always a hit. Dill pickle dip evokes nostalgia for an era when recipes were shared on index cards, and the measure of a good potluck dish was how quickly it disappeared. During the heyday of church picnics, the fellowship hall often doubled as a proving ground for comfort food creativity. One such creation was a warm, gooey dish that stole the show every time it appeared on the table. A blend of melted cheddar, sweet corn, and creamy ingredients baked to bubbly perfection, this dip embodied everything a crowd pleaser should be: indulgent, shareable, and impossible to resist. Cheddar corn dip transformed canned or fresh corn into a culinary centerpiece, and its simplicity was part of its charm. The ingredients were affordable and readily available, and the recipe could be customized to suit any taste. Add a pinch of spice for heat, or serve it with an assortment of chips and crackers. The possibilities were endless. It also had the rare advantage of being just as good lukewarm as it was fresh out of the oven, making it ideal for long picnic afternoons. So why don't we see this dish anymore? Blame it on changing tastes and the popularity of less labor-intensive store-bought dips. In a world where convenience reigns, the Chapel Cheddar Corn Dip has taken a back seat. But for those who remember its rich, cheesy goodness, it remains a delicious symbol of community gatherings and the joy of sharing a dish made with love. Despite what the name will make you think, church basement tuna noodle casseroles actually don't have anything to do with sleazy basements. Don't worry. I know church gatherings are pretty much for everyone, but that doesn't mean they aren't sanitary. On the other hand, something that might gross you out is a tuna noodle casserole. Seriously, I'm all in favor of experimenting and trying new things, but who looks at tuna, noodles, and a casserole dish and thinks that goes together? They also specifically used wide egg noodles back in the day and canned tuna instead of fresh tuna. The base would typically be a cream of mushroom soup, and people would often add sour cream or milk to give it even more of a velvety texture. Then the cheese, yes, the cheese in your mushroom soup was added. On top of that, diced celery, peas, and God knows what else also went into this dish. I can tell you why this isn't made anymore, and it's because it was just a bad idea. Despite how nice it was to have a change of flavor and taste with some seafood, this definitely wasn't it. The 1970s were a golden age for layered desserts, and few could compete with the indulgent simplicity of a dessert built on butterscotch pudding, whipped topping, and a graham cracker crust. This was the era of quick-fix elegance, when convenience foods met the creativity of home cooks determined to make something memorable. Blessed Butterscotch Delight was a perfect example. Rich, creamy, and easy to assemble, it became a favorite at church potlucks and family gatherings. The popularity of butterscotch pudding soared during the mid-20th century, largely thanks to its warm, caramel-like flavor and versatility. Paired with graham crackers, which were already a pantry staple, and whipped topping, a revolutionary product that simplified dessert making, it was a dessert that anyone could whip up with minimal effort. And let's not forget the charm of its layered presentation, which made it feel just fancy enough to stand out on a crowded dessert table. So, why did it fade away? By the 1990s, pre-made desserts and lighter options had taken over. The heavy reliance on processed ingredients didn't help, as health trends began favoring fresh fruits and whole grains over pudding mixes and whipped toppings. The late 1980s and early 1990s brought a new wave of potluck stars to church picnics, and virtuous vegetable pizza squares quickly claimed a spot near the top. With a flaky crescent roll crust, a tangy ranch-seasoned cream cheese base, and a colorful array of diced fresh vegetables, this dish was as visually appealing as it was satisfying. It struck a balance between indulgence and health, offering a lighter option without sacrificing flavor, a rare feat on a picnic table laden with heavy casseroles and desserts. The practicality of this dish was a major reason for its popularity. The recipe was straightforward, the ingredients were affordable, and the end result could be made ahead of time and served cold. This made it perfect for picnics, where refrigeration wasn't always guaranteed. It was also highly customizable. Broccoli, carrots, peppers, or even a sprinkle of cheese allowed for personal touches, ensuring it could cater to nearly any palate. So, why did these savory squares fade into the background? Part of the reason lies in the rise of pre-packaged veggie trays and dips, which offered a quicker, less labor-intensive alternative. Additionally, the appeal of ranch-flavored dishes has waned over the years as food trends shifted. Angel biscuits aren't actually something embellished with intense symbolism from the Bible, but a traditional Southern biscuit. This yeast roll takes baking powder, baking soda, and some yeast to make one of the fluffiest biscuits you'll ever lay your eyes on. This is actually why they ended up being called angel biscuits. It was mostly because people thought it fit since the biscuits were so light and airy. You might be wondering how such a delicate and tender dessert managed to come out of the South, though, and, well, in that regard, I can only say that even the biggest of barbecues need a dessert on the side. Church kitchens would often scour both the South and the North for any kind of recipes that would help them in their efforts. And man, after the absolute nightmare gauntlet that the first half of the 20th century was, there was a lot of room for relief efforts. Angel biscuits rose to popularity in the middle of the 20th century as a dish that was very hard to do wrong and very easy to make, which made it almost perfect for the kind of church gatherings most places were holding back then. Few dishes from the 1970s could walk the line between savory and sweet quite like this one. Sweet potato soufflé did just that. It was a culinary bridge between vegetables and dessert. With its cloud-like texture, cinnamon-kissed sweetness, and the signature marshmallow topping, it offered both comfort and spectacle at every church potluck or holiday gathering. The dish has deep roots in Southern cooking, where sweet potatoes have been a staple for centuries. During the mid-20th century, this recipe gained widespread popularity as canned goods and convenience foods became kitchen staples. Marshmallows, introduced in the late 1800s and heavily marketed in the 20th century, were the final flourish, a whimsical, sugary topping that turned a simple casserole into a crowd pleaser. Yet, as tastes evolved, the soufflé began to fade from weekly menus. The sugar-heavy marshmallow layer clashed with growing concerns about healthier eating. Sweet potatoes themselves survived the shift, reborn as fries, chips, and roasted sides. But the soufflé, with its unapologetic decadence, became relegated to holiday tables and church cookbook archives. In the kitchens of the South, where comfort food was practically a calling, one small golden snack became a beloved staple at church picnics and potlucks alike: sausage balls. These bite-sized morsels, made from sausage, cheese, and a touch of baking mix, were the perfect balance of savory and satisfying. They were an art form of resourcefulness, transforming simple pantry staples into something people would talk about long after the picnic ended. Sausage balls gained popularity in the mid-20th century when convenience mixes like biscuit became household essentials. Their practicality was unmatched, easy to make, even easier to transport, and nearly impossible to mess up. Whether served warm from the oven or cooled at room temperature, they held their flavor and texture, making them a no-brainer for any gathering. They doubled as appetizers, brunch sides, or even game day treats. So why did they fall out of favor? Over time, shifting dietary trends and a preference for more elaborate finger foods nudged them off the menu. Today, they are just a reminder of simpler times, when recipes were about taste, tradition, and togetherness, not calorie counts or culinary fads. Before we start going deep into what Church Lady 7-layer salads are, let's talk a bit about what a 7-layer salad even really is. As the name implies, it's got 7 actual layers to it, so you can kind of think of this as a quadra-burger, or the lasagna of salads. It's pretty much always served in a glass bowl, and this is meant to work with the presentation and really add some wow factor to the dish. The traditional way to go about making a 7-layer salad is with vegetables like chopped tomatoes, green peas, lettuce, hard-boiled eggs, bacon, onion, and cheese. Besides the obvious aesthetic appeal of something like that, you could also make this salad in advance, and churches were always on the lookout for the kind of dishes you could make and prepare ahead of time because of how busy they were. Now, the 7-lady version is a bit different. In churches, the concept of a church lady had become pretty popular. They were these women who would tend to the churchgoers and often end up being the foundational base of a lot of these potlucks, church gatherings, and neighborhood-wide meals. While it did give them a chance to show off their skills, most of everything you see on this list was really typically made by a church lady. During the 1970s, baked chicken dishes were the unsung heroes of potluck dinners, and this one, with its honey, pecan, and mustard glaze, struck the perfect balance between sweet and savory. Holy honey pecan chicken brought a touch of sophistication to the church potluck table, elevating humble chicken into a dish that felt both hearty and refined. The roots of this recipe trace back to Southern cooking traditions, where pecans were abundant and honey was a natural sweetener long before sugar became widespread. By the mid-20th century, recipes like this embraced the availability of affordable chicken cuts and pantry staples like mustard and honey. Chicken was cheap, easy to prepare, and universally loved, while the glaze was a clever way to turn basic ingredients into something special. So, why don't we see it much today? Part of the answer lies in the rise of boneless, skinless chicken breasts and pre-marinated options, which eliminated the need for labor-intensive glazes. Add to that the growing preference for lighter, grilled dishes, and this once popular recipe found itself fading into culinary obscurity. In the 20th century, church picnics were more than gatherings. They were culinary showcases, where simple ingredients turned into unforgettable creations. Among these was a dish that perfectly embodied practicality and crowd-pleasing charm, the hot dog crowned with creamy coleslaw. Born in the South, where coleslaw was practically a religion, this combination united 2 beloved staples into a handheld masterpiece. It was cheap, easy to assemble, and had the rare gift of tasting just as good warm as it did after sitting out for a hymn or two. The versatility of this dish made it a picnic powerhouse. Whether paired with smoky barbecue sauces or left unadorned, the coleslaw added crunch, tang, and a cool contrast to the savory hot dog. It was the kind of recipe where you didn't need a culinary degree, just a willingness to roll up your sleeves and pile it high. Kids loved it. Adults appreciated its simplicity, and even the most novice cooks could pull it off. But as convenience foods grew in popularity, fresh coleslaw recipes fell by the wayside. Pre-packaged sides and fast food chains stole the spotlight, leaving the Salvation slaw dog behind. So, gospel-glazed meatballs were pretty much the go-to holiday party food to go for, and their popularity was really something that was rooted in how simple this dish was. The original grape jelly and chili sauce glaze combination really came from here and broke into the mainstream. Lots of churches, depending on regional differences, preferences, and tastes, would also often use things in place of the typical apricot preserves that people would put in the grape jelly. They'd use orange marmalade or cranberry sauces, and some would make spicier versions instead of the typical super sweet ones. You could add in sriracha and crushed red pepper, or also add in chipotle. Some savory additions like garlic meant for a pretty neat little twist on an otherwise incredible meatball. The thing about meatballs was that as nice as they would also get pretty stale and repetitive. You grow up eating something like that your whole life and coming back home to it for Sunday dinner, then you go to a church and get the same, and it can kind of be a downer, despite how good this alternative way of making them was. In the era of resourceful cooking, few desserts embodied practicality quite like a fruit cobbler made with canned fruit cocktail and a biscuit crust. Fellowship fruit cobbler was a mainstay at church potlucks, offering a sweet, bubbling dessert that could feed a crowd with minimal effort. The dish gained traction in the mid-20th century, when canned fruit cocktail became a pantry staple in American homes. A product of clever marketing and food preservation innovation, fruit cocktail offered a colorful mix of diced fruits that made desserts feel festive. Topping it with a simple biscuit crust not only stretched the dish but gave it that golden, flaky finish that felt homemade even when shortcuts were taken. As versatile as it was, the cobbler started losing its shine by the late 20th century. Fresh fruits became more accessible year-round, and modern palates leaned toward desserts with more nuanced flavors and textures. Canned fruit cocktail, once a novelty, began to feel dated. But for those who grew up with it, this cobbler remains a comforting reminder of shared meals, church fellowship halls, and a time when food was about bringing people together, not about impressing them with gourmet flair. During the leaner years of the mid-20th century, frugality and ingenuity were staples in the kitchen. Enter the blessed bologna spread, a creamy, tangy concoction made from finely ground bologna, mayonnaise, and chopped pickles. A true testament to making the most of what you had, this spread transformed an inexpensive lunch meat into a flavorful filling for sandwiches or crackers. For church picnics and potlucks, it was a go-to dish, easy to prepare, affordable, and guaranteed to feed a crowd. The beauty of this spread lay in its adaptability. It could be served between slices of soft white bread, stuffed into hollowed-out celery stalks, or simply spooned onto crackers for a quick snack. Bologna itself, once a refrigerator mainstay, offered a rich, salty base that paired perfectly with the zing of pickles. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. This was food meant to nourish and bring people together, not impress. So, why has this humble spread disappeared? Changing tastes and the bologna stigma, yes, it exists, contributed to its decline. Once hailed as a budget-friendly staple, bologna lost favor to more sophisticated options. You know how the later half of the 20th century started being associated with bite-sized meals and finger foods? The seeds for that were sown just a little bit early with things like pineapple cheese squares. Thanks to Hawaiian Spam, which was introduced by Hormel in 1937, this actually became an extremely popular meal to have at churches. They were the perfect way to get some dairy, fat, and energy into a person's system, and they took next to no effort to make. Those church ladies were often overworked, you know? It was hard cooking for an entire community regularly. Pineapple cheese squares would typically have bits of ham cut into squares topped with cheese and pineapples, and they were excellent. The kind of thing that you could have while chatting away at meals and just socializing. That was also something people needed a lot, and churches didn't just act as places where people could come for a quick and good meal, but also as places where they could meet and interact with others. In the days when nothing went to waste, a pot of slow-cooked beans with hog jowls and onions was a way of life. Rooted in Southern cooking traditions, this hearty meal was a staple at church potlucks and community gatherings. Pinto beans, rich in protein and fiber, were an affordable way to feed a crowd, while hog jowls, a cut from the cheek of the pig, added smoky, savory depth that transformed the humble legume into something extraordinary. Historically, this dish thrived in communities where resourcefulness was key. Hog jowls, often considered a byproduct, were a favorite in Southern cuisine, where the whole hog philosophy reigned supreme. Combined with onions and slow cooking, the result was a dish that was simple yet deeply flavorful. And let's not forget the practicality. Beans are inexpensive, shelf-stable, and could simmer all day while the cook tackled other tasks. But as modern tastes shifted, hog jowls fell out of favor. Health trends, coupled with the rise of leaner meats, left this dish behind in the dust of culinary history. Convenience foods like canned beans and pre-seasoned mixes didn't help either. Mid-century America loved a dish that could pull double duty, easy to prepare and satisfying enough to feed a crowd. Picnic pea salad supreme fit the bill perfectly. This chilled salad, made with sweet green peas, crispy bacon, shredded cheddar, and a creamy dressing, was a real statement. In an era when canned and frozen vegetables were kitchen staples, this salad offered a way to transform humble peas into something extraordinary. It became a picnic regular, especially in the Midwest, where hearty and easy-to-make recipes reigned supreme. What made this dish so practical was its adaptability. The ingredients were pantry-friendly, the preparation was straightforward, and it held up well outdoors. No one likes a salad that wilts before the blessing. Its sweet and savory flavors appealed to kids and adults alike, and its vibrant colors made it visually appealing on any potluck table. Plus, bacon and cheddar, arguably the ultimate crowd-pleasing duo, did a lot of the heavy lifting. So, what happened? Well, somewhere along the line, supreme salads lost their shine. Health-conscious trends and the rise of pre-made options nudged recipes like this into obscurity. Grape salads with brown sugar pecan toppings actually got their claim to fame during the 1950s and the 1960s. It was right here when sweet and creamy salads started becoming popular. On one hand, you had people experimenting with every kind of jelly under the sun. On the other hand, you had people trying out creamy ambrosia salads and soups. Basically, people were warming up to the kind of textures and flavors you would find in this salad. That brown sugar pecan topping really sold the deal, though. Whether you found yourself in the Midwest or the South, it was that topping with its buttery flavor and texture that pretty much elevated this dish into the perfect salad to have. If you ever wanted to relax and not eat something too heavy but still get a few bites in, this was pretty much the perfect meal to make for yourself. The creamy dressing basically just used brown sugar, sour cream, and cream cheese. The chopped pecans and the caramelized brown sugar added everything the dish needed. A crunchy and sweet glaze that brought out the best in the grapes. In the mid-20th century, prunes enjoyed a moment in the culinary spotlight, and desserts like prune whip became surprisingly popular at gatherings. Light, airy, and subtly sweet, this dish combined stewed prunes with whipped egg whites to create a mousse-like treat that balanced indulgence with a touch of practicality. While it may not sound like the belle of the potluck table today, in its time, it was a creative way to transform a pantry staple into an elegant dessert. Prunes, or dried plums, were widely appreciated for their affordability and long shelf life. They were particularly common in post-war cooking, where resourceful homemakers turned simple ingredients into inventive recipes. With the rise of gelatin-based desserts, prune whip fit right into the trend of light, fluffy textures. It also offered a surprising nutritional bonus. Prunes were, and still are, known for their digestive benefits, making this dessert as functional as it was flavorful. By the late 20th century, however, prune whip fell out of favor. Healthier eating didn't hurt it. Marketing did. Prunes became saddled with a reputation as grandma food, overshadowing their versatility. In the mid-1900s, elegance and practicality often found their way onto the same plate, especially at church picnics and social gatherings. Righteous ribbon sandwiches were a shining example of this fusion, a visually striking, multi-layered finger sandwich that was as much a feast for the eyes as it was for the stomach. These sandwiches combined cream cheese, thinly sliced cucumbers, and pimento spread, layered between vibrant slices of white and rye bread. The name may have sounded fancy, but the recipe was delightfully simple, showcasing the resourcefulness of home cooks. Ribbon sandwiches were the epitome of versatility. They could be made in advance, sliced into perfect little portions, and adapted to suit almost any flavor profile. Need a vegetarian option? No problem. Add more vegetables. Want something heartier? Swap in a layer of ham or chicken salad. Their small size made them easy to serve and eat, ensuring that no one risked losing their sandwich during a spirited game of horseshoes. So, why don't we see them anymore? As trends shifted toward more casual grab-and-go fare, the labor-intensive ribbon sandwiches slowly fell out of favor. Those tables fed more than hunger. If even one of these dishes brought someone back, like and subscribe for more.